Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we continue with Guerlain Week and we are on to another L'Art and La Matière creation, and this is Bois de Armony. Now, this is a creation by the great Annick Menardo, and I insist that you put the great in front of her name because she really is a special creator, and I'm going to do a fresh couple sprays for you guys. And so I've been on a little bit of a Guerlain kick lately. And I'll tell you what, she is one of the queens of creating budget fragrances, but also, I would say, creating this oriental sort of ambery golden type dry down. She's really an amazing creator. So before we get into the details of Bois de Armony, I'm going to let this fresh spray settle for a little bit. And we're going to do a very quick unboxing. I already cut it open because it was really wrapped well. It's from a friend who wants to remain anonymous, so thank you. You know who you are. But first, let's start with the bottle. So this is a bottle that I've been looking for a long time. Very hard to come by in this vintage format. He said, hey man, I know what you've been going through, and I want to send you this. And I said, okay, bring it on. So this is Eau de Ils by Matri Parfume Agentier. And I smelled this in the sample set that Rich Mitch sent me, and man, I am blown away. I really, really like this. So there's the older style Mpeg bottles. Oh man, you know what this reminded me of? It's like Matri Parfume Agentier does Antaeus, okay? There's something animalic about it, and the thing about Mpeg fragrances is that they're really sort of fine French perfumery through and through. Like if you want a house that makes fine French perfumery, this is one of the houses to definitely try and get your nose on. They're so underappreciated, I would say. And so Eau de Ils came out in 1988. It's one of the original Matri Parfume Agentier creations. And it is discontinued, from my understanding. They don't make this anymore, but it's listen to the note listing and listen to how similar you start thinking about sort of Antaeus, if you will. Tarragon, myrtle, coffee, labdanum, frankincense, and ylang-ylang with galbanum, patchouli, and vetiver. Now, galbanum makes it a little bit greener, but I swear there's some castoreum in here. It smells to me like there's some unlisted castoreum to me. I don't know how long this lasted until they stopped creating it, but man, as soon as I smelled this, I was like, this may be my favorite Mpeg fragrance. Like, it's me. It's Mpeg does a fragrance for Ram. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like to me. Very smoky, earthy, spicy, slightly animalic, slightly green. It's just, the coffee makes it so special, and it has that fine French perfumery that I love about things like Guerlain. You know, it does everything I love in fine French perfumery. But, man, this and some of the Mpegs that I've kind of been collecting, it's really a house that I think is worth diving into. They are very, very impressive stuff. So that's the first one. So thank you for the full bottle. And then he sent me a couple other things, which I have never heard of some of these. Actually, that's not true. I've heard of this brand. I've just never smelled any of them. And so here, well, I'll show you before I take all the wrap. You can't see it from the glare. Hang on, let me get all this stuff off. I guess I should have been even more prepared than I was. Okay. So this is a check and spake set. We've got Oxford and Cambridge, Cuba EDP, Neroli EDP, and number 88 EDP. So, there you have it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this check and spake house. I know of them, but honestly, I don't really know them because I don't know anything about them. But I've heard of them. So, here, let's look these up real quick. Oxford. Oxford and Cambridge. Very English there. If I could spell. There we go. This is the Eau de Parfum. Yes, Eau de Parfum. So apparently there was a cologne. I don't know if they discontinued the cologne or what, but this is peppermint, rosemary, bergamot, French lavender, true lavender, opposed to the false one, and oak moss. John Stephen is the perfumer, who I actually have heard good things about John Stephen. And then we have Cuba. Cuba by Czech. So again, this is the Eau de Parfum. The original was a cologne, which I think is, I don't know if it's discontinued or what, but I think so. And that came out in early 2000s. They then re-released it in an Eau de Parfum in 2021, it looks like. So there's the Eau de Parfum of Cuba. This is supposed to be very earthy, you know, rum, bay rum, peppermint, clove, rose, tonka bean, tobacco, frankincense, vetiver, and cedarwood. Again, John Stephen. John Stephen is the perfumer. And then we have Neroli from Czech and Spake, which is, excuse me, again, 2021, they re-released these in Eau de Parfum. This is Neroli Orange, African Orange Blossom, and Ylang Ylang. John Stephen, the perfumer again. I'm guessing he's also going to be the perfumer of number 88, but let's see. Czech and Spake, number 88. Is it on here even? Maybe it's not. Oh, here it is. Okay, number 88, Eau de Parfum. Bergamot, geranium, frangipani, sweet acacia, rose otto, sandalwood, and vetiver. Shirley Brody and John Stephen. So, okay, there you go. So this is supposed to be, I think, their take on like a fougere, if you will, it sounds like. Okay, so that is the little sample set that he also very kindly included. So thank you, my friend. Very interested in getting to know those. And then we have some individual samples. So let's see what's in here. He told me, but I forgot, to be honest with you. So, all right, I'm not going to go through each one of these with the notes, but we've got Louvre by Serge Lutens, which awesome. I've been wanting to smell more Serges forever. An awesome Philosopos soap, which I will definitely use that. You know, I use these soaps. I don't actually just hang on to them and collect them. These get used, so that's badass. A piece of oud, which smells like soap, funny enough, from the soap being in there. But now that I have a burner, I'll try to burn this and see what it's like. But that's awesome. I love that. Good stuff. And then we have some more oud. It's kind of cool. He knows I've turned into an oud head. Let's see, what else is in here? A little bit more oud. This one you can kind of see. It's kind of cool. You can see the sort of marbling where it's brown from the infection and then the outside. That's kind of cool. And then we have Nabucco Parfum Fin. We have Jean-Louis Trintignant in gold, which I actually really like the one Jean-Louis Trintignant that I've shown off before on the channel. It's this one. Oh, it's this one right here. The Pour Homme. So there's a vintage little gem from the past, and this is a different Jean-Louis Trintignant I've never smelled before. And then, there's a lot of samples in here. Nina Ricci Club, which I was just talking about wanting to smell this so bad, so that's very apropos. Serge Lutens Dame Blonde. Again, anytime Serge exists in a time and space of itself, according to Rich Mitch, and he is spot on. Maurer and Wirtz Revisa. Never heard of that before. And then we have Serge Lutens Mandarin. This is probably one of the ones I wanted to smell. One of these Serges that I wanted to smell more than any other. And Annick Menardo's Vetiver, which I hear really, really good things about. If you're a vetiver lover, I hear that's a really good one. Okay, awesome. So I cannot wait to get to know those and try some of the ones I've never smelled before. So that is awesome. Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much. That is very, very, very generous of you. Okay, So let's go back to Bois de Armony. Let me read you the little blurb here. And as I've said, so created by Annick Menardo, who I really think is one of the most talented perfumers out there. Really understanding her work has done wonders for just my understanding of perfume in general, I would say. So today we discussed Bois de Armony from 2005. So let me read the little blurb according to the Guerlain website, and then we'll sort of hop into it. So they say it's a fragrance that is incredibly delicate with ambery swirls, is how they describe it. An haute perfumery interpretation of Armenian paper, which we'll talk about that at the end, but inspired by the Armenian tradition of burning benzoin to form swirls of incense smoke, the Guerlain perfumer has reinterpreted the scent of Armenian paper, bestowing it with warmly addictive vanilla accents. Bois de Armony blends piquant sensuality and woody warmth, as incense and spices are underscored by a benzoin absolute and set against a backdrop of white musks and balms, okay? So the fragrance artist touched the intoxicating fragrance of Armenian papers reinterpreted with refinement and sensuality. If it were a painting, an Orientalist's work, and actually Annick Menardo is a master at doing Oriental style perfumery, so that makes a lot of sense. Bois de Armony might call to mind the captivating atmosphere of an Orientalist canvas, particularly moved by the subdued, hypnotizing ambiance of these paintings. Jean-Paul Guerlain became their avid collector, which I think is really badass. They talk a little bit about the benzoin used in here. Sourced in Thailand and Indonesia, benzoin is one of the essential ingredients used in making Armenian paper. It occurs naturally in the form of a gum or resin and is harvested from the benzoin tree through making small incisions in its trunk. It's characterized as balmy, vanillic, and woody notes, and it's very warm type it smells. So it feels very enveloping and warming. And that's very reminiscent of Bois de Armony. So I will give you my very first impression of Bois de Armony. I've been playing with this decant for months and months and months now, or not even a decant, but like an officially branded sample. And it was very similar to the very first time I smelled Angelique Noire. Not that I think it smells like Angelique Noire, but sort of my feeling about it is very similar. There was this sort of two corresponding ideas that popped into my head at once. Number one, I said to myself, this is very Guerlain. This is a Guerlain fragrance through and through. Even though it's not like an ancient Guerlain, you know, it's not a Jacques Guerlain creation or anything like that. It's not an Amy Guerlain, but it is a Guerlain creation nonetheless through and through. Even though a Guerlain is not penned as the perfumer, they really did a great job with this part of the L'Art and La Matière collection from 20 years ago, making it a Guerlain, but also allowing these perfumers to kind of do their own thing, if you will. So first thing that popped in my head is that it's a very, very Guerlain. The other thing that popped into my head is that this is a fragrance of its time, okay? This is a fragrance, the first thing that came to mind when I smelled this is 2005, okay? This is 2005 in a nutshell. And the fragrances that began to come to mind, Dior Homme, which also came out right around 2005, L'Instant de Guerlain, which the Eau Extreme version came out in 2005, this one right here. This came to mind. And Bois d'Argent by Dior. Okay, now, if you know the whole story of Bois d'Argent, this came out a year or two before Dior Homme came out, but if you read some of the note listings of Bois d'Argent, you're going to find a lot of similarity to Bois de Armony. And that's why I think that this is very of its time, is what I called it. It's interesting because the most popular fragrances of the time that I mentioned, like Dior Homme, like L'Instant de Guerlain, the most popular fragrances are the ones that I mentioned really quick because that's probably how you would be able to associate it with it. But honestly, that's not the fragrance that came to mind. The one that came to mind is actually a lesser known fragrance from the house of Lanvin, and it is called Arpege pour Homme. Now, this was a giant flop, and if you take a look at the cap, this looks a lot like the Dior Homme sort of cap, right? You can almost see the Dior Homme cap inside of there. And very Dior Homme-esque, okay? So this is almost like a very designer, extra designer version. If Dior Homme is designer, if Dior Homme is like the designer version of Bois d'Argent, then this is like the extra designer version. You know, this is the fragrance that really flashbulbed into my head at first whenever I smelled Bois de Armony. And to make it even more interesting, this is also from 2005, but and I've often talked about how these years sometimes kind of really can come together. And this was a huge flop. I think didn't sell at all. Got discontinued very very quickly. But it's a very synthetic smell. Okay, so very synthetic, very designer smelling iris and woods and vanillas, extra vanilla in here. The iris is nowhere near as good as Dior Homme. The details are nowhere near as good. You know. And so this is a very synthetic version of kind of where we're going with Bois de Armony, okay? Now, Bois de Armony, to me, I would say feels like a proper niche version of this style of perfumery that we get in Arpege pour Homme, okay? So it's almost like they took this style, which was so popular at the time, clearly, and it really reinforces to me that fragrances released in the same year have this sort of connection in time, you know? They're using similar oils from the oil houses. They're dealing with a world where similar trends and styles are very popular. And I often remind everyone, and will continue to do so, that when you smell a fragrance from the past, you are smelling a snapshot in time, okay? So in this case, you're smelling 2005. Bois de Armony, to me, is a great example of what was so popular in 2005. And where people's attitudes were, where their heads were at the time, what they liked. And, you know, you have to keep in mind these houses like Dior, Guerlain, all these other houses, they spent lots of money on market research and, groups of people who will do testing and all that stuff just to try to predict what people will like, what they won't like, where the future trends will go. And so when I smelled this, I really thought, wow, Guerlain did a good job creating a Guerlain, but also really creating something of its time, okay? So to me, this fragrance opens up with this, what I would consider to be a blended wood accord, okay? On my initial notes, when I did my sort of breakdown before I read the note listing, I wrote that there was cedar, sandalwood, and gaiac wood, and I was wrong on 2 of those 3. There's only one of those woody notes actually listed in the note listing. Doesn't mean that there's no sandalwood or cedar wood in here, but I thought for sure cedar was in here. I was like, this is a cedar type note, hands down. Nope, I was wrong. It's gaiac wood, according to the breakdown anyways. Wouldn't surprise me if there was others, but if you go off the note listing, I was wrong there by a long shot. But what comes to mind is this blended sort of wood accord, if you will, okay? And what makes it so interesting is it is at the same time sort of softened and hardened, okay, and amplified. So it's softened by the iris, okay? The iris here is one of the very first things you'll smell with the wood. It hits you almost instantly. It's a beautiful iris accord, okay? It's soft, it's purpley, has that purple iris sort of powderiness starting to come through. And then it's also at the same time, sort of as it's softened, it's also amplified by the frankincense, all right? So this wood note is very sort of elusive in a way because it's softened and hardened. It's become powdery but also amplified. And there's this contrast right there. Many times I try and kind of hone in on the contrast of the fragrance. Here, the contrast is what is happening to this wood accord. This wood accord is being pulled in all these different directions to me. And it has these tiny bits of like a tincture to it. It almost feels like you took the wood and you almost like dipped it in sort of a tincture that Jean-Paul Guerlain was working on at the time. And in 2005, Jean-Paul Guerlain was still in, he was still part of the company. He wasn't kicked out yet. He was still there. And so again, it would not surprise me one bit if Jean-Paul Guerlain worked with these perfumers. And even though Annick Menardo is listed as the perfumer, wouldn't surprise me one bit if Jean-Paul Guerlain was there lending a hand, giving advice, all that good stuff, right? So imagine this gaiac wood, which this is oud, but imagine this gaiac wood that is just dipped in sort of this tincture that Jean-Paul Guerlain was working on at the time. And, that tincture sort of being dried and left over and evaporating off of the wood. And then overall, when you smell it, you smell most of the wood, okay? You don't smell most of the tincture. But the tincture is maybe like leftover, okay? It's maybe like this sort of leftover feeling on the wood. And the wood is still the most prominent note that you smell, but this strange kind of undertone of tincture that was created by a perfumer is sort of like dipped onto the wood, if that makes sense. That's how I imagine Bois de Armony in the opening. Now, So it's beautiful. It is a beautiful creation through and through. It's a pure Guerlain high end creation, fine French perfumery at its finest. Now, before all of this sort of really hits your nose, I noticed that there are these little pops of incense that start coming through, okay? They're not heavy. Don't think big fireworks on the 4th of July or something like that. But think of like these small little poppers kids might throw on the ground or something, you know? It gives the wood this entrance, almost like a star athlete being announced or like a rock star coming onto the stage. There's just like electricity in the air. The crowd's cheering, you know, all that stuff. And you can tell instantly the electricity and the poppers are not why the crowd is there. The crowd is there for the rock star, which is the wood. The wood is the rock star in this case. That is the rock star note. Bois is the very first thing, that woodiness, and it seems just so perfectly executed to me. It just totally won me over. I love the way that the wood note is executed here. And I honestly never knew wood from Armenia was so sort of sought after. Bois de Armony, I think, literally translates to wood from Armenia, or Armenian wood or something. And I had no idea Armenian wood was so sought after, but apparently I did some digging, and Armenians almost treat their wood as if it's like something to be like culturally proud of, you know? Apparently, wood carving is a component of Armenian culture that has gone back centuries and centuries and centuries. They created things like utilitarian items like ladles and spoons and decorative things and figurines and ornaments and all this stuff, okay? So, I must admit, as a Guerlain fan, it is very easy for me to like this fragrance. Very, very easy. Through and through. Hands down, I'm a fan. This is a very easy love for me, especially with that Guerlainade kind of peeking through in the background. And the Guerlainade is usually made up of some flowers, some vanilla, some spices, you know, probably some tonka bean and some resins and balsams and stuff like that, okay? But the thing that really got me instantly is that this Annick Menardo structure is underneath this fragrance. So I mentioned in the very beginning that one of the things that really got me is how it's a Guerlain, but they also allowed the perfumers to sort of to do their own thing, to do what they are good at, right? So I mentioned in my review of Angelique Noire, and I did a few days back on the channel, that Daniela Andrier felt like she was kind of using ideas that she made in Angelique Noire for the next 20 years when she was being the in-house perfumer of Prada. She did a lot of Prada fragrances over the next 20 years, from 2005 to current, basically. And if you've smelled some of Prada's work that Daniela Andrier had done, you'll pick up bits and pieces that was done in Angelique Noire. Well, Annick Menardo was already, I would say, a very famous perfumer in 2005, okay? And so with Bois de Armony, you kind of have these feelings of things like Jaipur Homme that came before. D Squared Potion, for example. If you've smelled these two Annick Menardo works, you'll kind of have an idea of what I would call this sort of like benzoin, ambery, oriental sort of base that's full of golden gummy resins, and it's very sticky feeling, and it just kind of became a calling card of Annick Menardo. It's present here in Bois de Armony, okay? And I love how everything is balanced. It's almost like Guerlain balanced like 3 different scales here. One, the Guerlain DNA. The other is what was very popular at its time in 2005. That irisy sort of woodiness with a little bit of frankincense. Think Guerlain's version of Bois d'Argent, okay? Um, and and then finally, sort of allowing Annick Menardo's strong suit with this very balmy, benzoiny, spicy, woody signature underneath. Again, if you smelled things like Jaipur Homme, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this, okay? And again, this is, gosh, I don't know. It says Bois de Armony currently for 100 mils is 485 Canadian dollars. Why is it in Canadian dollars? Let me change this to US. United States. Ah, you bastards. You took my Bois de Armony page away. Why would you do such a thing? Bois de Armony. Bois de Armony. Now it's not going to pull up. That is unbelievable. Okay, whatever that uh, translated to US dollars, 485 Canadian dollars for 100 mils. Sounds like a lot, however you cut it. So the fact that this is like a $20 to $30 fragrance just shows what a value for money this is. And I've done a comparison video on this on the channel, this Jaipur Homme. So, so yeah, I would be very surprised if this sort of base wasn't made up of also some tonka bean and some other things that you find in some of the other sort of Guerlain signatures. Now, if you look at the note listing, like I said, very specifically, you'll notice that it's Gaiac wood, not cedar like I thought, but Gaiac wood. And it's a wood that kind of gives off this slightly burned, slightly toasty type feeling, right? Like the wood is kind of toasted and burnt a little bit. And that mixes beautifully with that poppers of the frankincense that just kind of sits on top of this very mild, sweet, but soft and delicate Guerlain base with a touch of vanilla. And just like I said with Angelique Noire, it's so Guerlain. And yet some folks I think would instantly write this off because they would say, oh, it's just a woody fragrance, or it's just, you know, too soft, or whatever. I think this line really in general is very, this L'Art and Le Métier line is elegant as hell. Personally, I would wear these anywhere to the most important events. They're very French, very elegant, very fine. Now the incense here is supposed to be reminiscent of Armenian paper, but don't think of like a hardcore papyrus note. If you've ever smelled Javoy's private label, which I will review one of these days. I've got a bottle back there somewhere. You know, that's a heavy, dark, burnt, black smelling sort of papyrus type smell. Or if you've smelled one of my favorite flankers of all time, no one talks about, Lalique's Hommage à l'Homme Voyageur, done by Michel Almarac. This is a beautiful take on papyrus, dark, spicy papyrus. This is totally different from that. Armenian paper apparently is nowhere near as dark, and it's more resinous and soft. And in fact, let me read you a little bit about Armenian paper. I was doing a little bit of research on it, and it says it's been produced for centuries. You can literally buy it. It's called V de Armony as one brand. But the paper is infused with essences, fragrances, or essential oils like benzoin to achieve a perfuming or cleansing effect. So they come in this little package where you kind of rip it off and burn it. And they're produced everywhere now, not just in Armenia. But apparently it became very popular at the end of the 19th century. Auguste Ponsat discovered that Armenian households would burn plants in the Styrax genus, very interesting, as fragrance. And they adopted this habit with the help of a pharmacist, created his own recipe where benzoin resin was dissolved in alcohol, then let to soak into blotting paper. And they burn that as like a purifier, as incense, apparently. Very, very interesting, I would say. And Francis Kirkjohn actually is Armenian, which is crazy because it almost seems like he could have done this one since he was Armenian. That would have been an even cooler connection, but he did Rose Barbar instead. But there's a lot of different companies that have been around for a long time that, you know, create these accordion style like paper that you place on this heated thing and burn the strip, basically. And it releases its scent characteristics. So that's what this was supposed to be reminiscent of. Benzoin, formaldehydes, deodorant smells, all this stuff, right? Rose, deodorant, all this stuff. So the note listing is frankincense, iris, and pink pepper in the top, with Gaiac wood, benzoin, coriander in the heart, with copiba balsam, patchouli, and white musk in the base. And I'll tell you what, I think that it's that patchouli that reminded me of this tincture feel. It reminded me a little bit of the patchouli from Heritage, just a touch. And that's maybe why I got this feeling of like the wood being soaked in this tincture that Jean-Paul Guerlain created. But it's very oriental, very woody. And I think it's a fantastic fragrance. For me, I would own a bottle no problem if money was no issue. Now, one other thing I should mention before we go. Couple people that I have seen discuss this scent have mentioned some of them get like this fermented quality to the wood. There's no oud in here apparently if you listen to the brand. But another person said they get this peaty-like quality. Both of those qualities can come from maybe a little bit of an oud note. I don't get much of that, I must admit. But since multiple people mentioned it, I figured I would as well. You have to remember, this is before Tom Ford put out Oud Wood, which turned oud into like this craze, this phenomenon in 2007. But this was after M7 by YSL in 2002. This was a couple years after that. So I wonder if Guerlain was cheeky enough to add a touch of oud to this sort of incensey, sort of woody creation. Nowadays, I'd be very surprised if oud was not added to a brief like this. Either way, I love this Guerlain line. I would own it if money was no issue. Oh, last thing. Late into the dry down, which I have a later dry down here, you kind of get this powdery almondy smell that starts to come through, which is very, very Guerlain. Guerlain loves using this almond thing to kind of come through from time to time. So a little bit of almond starts to come through, and almost maybe a little bit of this powdery honey, like a fresher type honey smell. Um, Either way, I love this fragrance. I'm a big fan. I would definitely own a bottle. I like this line in general. I think this is a very chic line. Too bad the prices have just gone astronomically higher as the years have gone on. But either way, this is my take. If you have any experience with V de Armony, do let me know. Thank you to my perfume god people for the generosity. Can't wait to really start to wear stuff like this. As always, it's a pleasure. Cheers, guys. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.